I want to say a big thank you to those making this event possible, specifically and especially Jill Velez, Erin Cunningham, and our chair, Susan Rather. Kyle Peets is a multiple disciplinary artist and educator who has exhibited his work nationally and abroad. He has had solo exhibitions at Platte Forum Gallery in Denver, the Ana Mendieta Gallery in Iowa City, and Retzlaff Gallery in Ashland, Oregon. Various group exhibition and portfolio exchanges include Character Profile at Root Division in San Francisco, Get Your Head in the Game at the Naughton Gallery at Queen's University, Belfast, Art is Our Last Hope at the Phoenix Art Museum, and Art Shanty on the frozen White Bear Lake in Minneapolis. His video, You, was shown at the 2015 Southern Colorado Film Festival. His work has been published in the periodical SPRTS by Endless Editions out of New York, archived at the Watson's Library Special Collections, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and MoMA, Manhattan. His poetry has been published by various literary journals, such as Interrupture, No, and Stolen Island. Kyle received an Artist in Residence Richardson-Spica Fellowship in 2017-18 at the Interlochen Center for the Arts, a SIF Fellowship, and Wilhelm and Jane Bodine Fellowship from the University of Iowa. He received his MFA in Printmaking and Sculpture from the University of Iowa, as well as a graduate certificate in book arts from the Iowa Center for the Book. I have had the pleasure of knowing Kyle as an artist, colleague, and friend for nearly 4 years. He is not only a talented, thoughtful, and highly adaptive artist and writer, but he's one of the most patient, open, and kind human beings I know. Please join me in welcoming Kyle Peets.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan. That was super sweet. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Jill and Megan, for organizing this in the UT Art Department. I'm very excited. I've never done an online lecture like this before. I've only given this talk in person, and I've got jokes, so I feed off those jokes. So if you're laughing, send that into the ether, and maybe I can respond to it. Okay. All right, let's jump into it. This is a sock. This is what we do with it. Isn't that weird? Taking notes. Isn't it weird that we take this tubular piece of cotton and slowly slide it over our feet every single morning without thinking? Like, that is truly bizarre, but we don't normally notice it because we do it every day. And so I want to talk about this guy, VIKTOR SHKLOVSKY, and his idea of defamiliarization, and as a basic tenet for my work. And so it's a pretty simple idea, and it's if we see something enough, we'll stop seeing it. And that's the natural tendency of our perception. He used the word ostranani, a Russian word, and he talked about one of art's goals to encourage people to see common things as strange, wild, or unfamiliar, defamiliarizing what is known in order to know it more different, to know it differently or more deeply, or as he put it, to make the stone stony, or in our case, to make the sock socky. So let's just look at this slide number 1 here, and you can see it's got 2 very familiar elements: white crew sock and some text with some with my name. And so, how can we defamiliarize these 2 very familiar things? Well, we might do something like this to the text. It's pretty good. Okay. It's becoming a little less familiar. I can still kind of see that S in the T, and so maybe I can push that. Ooh, there we go. Okay, so now it's like it's becoming something else. Those letters are no longer signifiers. Perhaps they're a little bit more like material, the things that the letters are made of, lines and shapes. But that sock's pretty socky. So, ooh, okay, can do that. But I can still recognize it. Ooh, bingo. Okay, forest of socks, jumble of letters. Now it's become defamiliarized through, pretty simple means. And this is magic. The fact that we can take an ordinary thing and turn it into an extraordinary thing is that's straight up magic. And so this is something that that I recognized pretty early on in art making, and I love how little it takes to defamiliarize. And this is kind of a thread throughout the work. Okay, so here's another example. My cousin Branson Anderson invented this game. So this is where I'd like to ask everybody to unmute their microphones. Not yet. We're going to sing a song. I want you to think of your favorite song, or think of a song that you know all the lyrics to. Could be the ABCs or Jingle Bells or whatever. Just think of a song that you know all the lyrics to. I'm going to have everybody unmute their microphone. I'm going to stop sharing so we can see everybody, and we're all going to sing this song on my command at the same time. All right. Ready? Unmute those mics.
Do we start?
Not yet. Good question. Okay, how about here in like, all right, everyone's got a song? Got a song in mind?
Oh my God, you're going.
Okay.
Okay, someone's background.
Okay, here we go. On 3. 1, 2, 3.
Get a Furby, and turn around, brothers all around.
With the cool and system in the club, you blazing up. Some girl, like she's saying up. My God, pop bottles and you got the right kind of bill. In the air, but he never fly, coach.
Nice. Nice music. Okay, all right. Go ahead and mute those mics. That's all you get. I'm gonna go back. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I heard some pretty familiar songs in there. But how cool that we can just layer these together and all of a sudden they become wild and unfamiliar. So when I was a kid, there were 3 things that I think influenced my work today in my life. I grew up in Montreal, Quebec, so hockey's pretty big. So one of those things, playing hockey and drawing hockey logos. The burned down geodesic Buckminster Fuller dome that he made for the 1967 World Expo. And then trying to visualize infinity until it gave me a funny feeling. I would do this in the backseat of my car as a kid, driving to pass the time, and I would think of a planet, our planet, and then the planets around that, and then the planets around that, and being contained in a galaxy, and then galaxies beyond that, and eventually I would get so far away that it would fill me. I would feel it in my chest, this euphoria. And it was very pleasant. And each time I had to go further and further. And it gave me this funny feeling. And so I started thinking about this word funny. Funny is, not then I started thinking about it, but recently. It's a word that's often used when one is confronted by something that is, a little out of step or wrong or not quite right. I'm fascinated by these funny moments because meaning is not fixed, but it's subverted and confused and freed from having to make too much sense. And so we lean into those funny moments to try to figure out what's going on. And most of my work here are different iterations of these funny moments. And I use that nebulous area just beyond meaning as a place to critique dominant narratives and conventions through poetry and humor and mischief. So here's another example from my childhood. I had this wallpaper that was similar to this. However, it was misregistered. So for you printmakers out there, registration is when you're printing multiple colors and you have to line them up. Registration just means lining them up. So the registration was off. And so Snoopy and and Charlie Brown's, their heads were a couple inches to the right. And I spent many hours trying to figure out the problem of the floating heads. So here's kind of another example of this funny moment where things don't necessarily line up. Okay, part 1, play, mischief, and the uncanny. So when I first started making art, I thought this is what I was interested in. And I thought this is what it meant to be an artist, to look kind of like this thing here and to think deeply. And I was interested in how knowledge works, specifically as a printmaker working with these systems or these processes that had many steps. If you get one of the steps wrong, it's like an algebraic equation, and you're going to get the wrong answer. And so I would make work like this that had some pretty strict conceptual rules. And so this was an early print I made in 2008 called Send Me a Sentence, where I put an ad on Craigslist asking for a sentence. And then people would send me sentences and I'd print them verbatim in the order in which I received. And I really enjoyed how quickly it became illegible, and how quickly meaning was confused. And then I realized I wasn't interested in how knowledge works, but really in how it doesn't work. And then moreover, what can art do that other forms of knowledge can't do? So what can it do when there isn't meaning? What can it do that religion and science can't do? It can do things like can use satire and humor and irony. And it can do other things like this. So here we go. I have a couple UT shout outs. Here's your boy, Matthew McConaughey. In this, so Contact, I'm not sure how many people have seen this movie, but co-written by Carl Sagan. And it's about the spiritual ramifications if you discover life in the universe. And so there is a scene at the end where the astronaut, where Jodie Foster kind of reaches this other level of life, and she says, "Oh, they should have brought a poet instead of me." And so that speaks to something that poetry and art can do. The sort of strength of that language that maybe science and NASA cannot. Or another example, a former student of Megan and I, David, swore that his pneumonia was cured by Starry Night at the Art Institute. In 2003, so this is early grad school, I was confronted by the fact that I wasn't making work that felt natural to me. It felt forced. I felt I was extending myself, perhaps trying to be smarter than I was, sound smarter than I was. And I'd hear myself talking and I'd think, yeah, that guy's kind of an asshole. And so I made this piece here called Natural Light that simply brought natural light into a gallery. And so in grad school, I went to grad school in a Menards, a gutted Menards at the University of Iowa because our art buildings were flooded. And in that Menards, there was zero natural light. And so the impulse was quite simple. I want to bring natural light into this gallery. And I did it by making this hole in the gallery wall and then lining 55 feet of duct tubing with mirrored mylar so that it collected light here from the outside and then brought it all the way through into this hole here and that's the other side of the gallery wall. So bring it back into the gallery. And this was a very important piece for me for a couple reasons. One, it started with an instinct, just a very simple impulse. I want to bring natural light into the gallery. And then I went from there. Two, it worked kind of like a metaphor for me. So I felt like it was bridging my life outside of the studio to my life inside of the studio. And kind of connecting those worlds versus and making my studio work and practice a little bit more sincere and honest. I also realized I had a good art instinct. And this was really important to me as a learning experience. I realized for the way that I make, I really I have to have my eyes open in order to see these potentialities, or in order to see moments that I'm interested in to make sense of them. So another example of that was this flying machine project. So in grad school, the painting department, they were moving buildings, and so essentially they had this eviction party here at their old in the painting building. And I found all these old fans, and I decided to paint the room blue and call it the flying machine. And I turned it on, and I expected this amazing thing to happen. Nothing happened, because fans don't work if they're against a wall like that. They need a source to pull air from. So it didn't work at all. So then I made a better version of it using 9 industrial fans, each with 4.5 horsepower engines. And so this was the same thing. I had this image in my head. I'm not sure where it came from, and I wanted to make it happen, quite simply. So taking the thinking down a little bit and playing hunches. So at the same time, I was going to sleep, and this image or this sentence popped into my head. It was during the time of The Artist is Present, so perhaps it was influenced by that piece when it came out. You can see here one of my printmaking colleagues who is, I guess, levitating in the print shop. But for this, very simple, I bought a new pair of socks, and I cut out these words, these letters to mask out a large piece of paper. And then I stepped on the ink, and I walked around the socks, around the print, to create a sort of monoprint. And it was displayed with the socks that made it. And so my interest in how knowledge fails is definitely informed by our world and by some of the absurd moments. For example, on the left here, we have the Svalbard Global Seed Vault that contains most, if not all, of the world's species of food. So if we, just in case we all kill each other, a couple people can, restart the world with a good food supply. And then in Kentucky, there's the KFC Secret Recipe Vault, which is said to contain the Colonel's secret recipe that apparently has 11 herbs and spices. And so humor became an important rhetoric tool for me. And I started to research humor a little bit. And so in Freud's Jokes and the Relationship to the Subconscious, he says, like metaphor, joking is the ability to find similarities in dissimilar things. Joking is merely playing with ideas. Not just playing with ideas, but playing with ideas in a disruptive way. The comics work operates in the world of transgression. And this last sentence here was really sexy to me. I really like this idea of using humor to connect disparate ideas, but also as a way to sort of pull at the seams, to work as a rhetoric tool for transgression. Mitch Hedberg, great example of this. He's got a lot of jokes that play with ideas. For example, he I'm gonna butcher this. He's got a joke about being at a mall and coming upon a escalator, and there's a sign that says escalator temporarily out of order, and he thinks to himself, an escalator cannot temporarily become out of order, it can only temporarily become stairs. So at the same time, I read this book that was extremely important to me, Lewis Hyde, Trickster Makes This World. And here's a short quote from it. A trickster is a boundary crosser. Every group has its edge, its sense of in and out, and trickster is always there at the gates of the city, in the gates of life, making sure there is commerce. And so here you have this idea again of boundaries, you know, going back to that misregistered wallpaper and boundary crossing, and perhaps something that fits within or not within a boundary, something that falls outside of it, can actually almost act like a misinterpretation, which can reveal a lot of the ways in which we interpret things and the limitations of those interpretations. So this was part of a project I made about the gold rush and gold fever, and it's called Pickle Stick. And I read in a science book that stones from 2 million years ago have survived, but sticks haven't. So this is my attempt to give the stick a chance. Return policy was a piece I made in 2014, and I went shopping at Walmart to make this piece, and I went shopping for everything I could find that would make a sound. So you have a toaster, AC, razor, blender, paper shredder, dehumidifier, and I staged a 15-minute performance. And the band had t-shirts and silkscreen t-shirts and band posters. I had a merch table featuring these items. So if you can see here that the blender is kind of Beyonce. Blender is up front and center. She's kind of the lead. So the Blender's solo album was also for sale. You can see her working on it in the studio. The Blender album is called Many Shades of Blend. So I recorded the 15-minute performance. There was an MC and laser lights and a fog machine. So I recorded it, and then I slipped the recording, the audio recording, into the packaging and returned all the items to Walmart and got my money back. And so the recording now is evidence of these items' brief yet exciting vacation from the Walmart shelves. In 2003, I visited a friend in Guanajuato, and I experienced a couple of things there that got me thinking about time. They have this museum of mummies that they found in a cave. And these mummies were, I think, a couple hundred years old, and they still had, some of them were so well preserved, they still had clothes on them. They had the world's smallest fetus mummy, or mummified fetus, which was a nightmare. That's a dweeb. So this was the first kind of ruin I'd ever been to, ancient ruin, and it got me thinking about time, and the mass expands behind me and ahead of me, and I started to feel a little bit small. We also visited this empty crater, this volcano, and so that's me down there. Who's that guy? What does he matter? So I started thinking about limitations. Perhaps I wasn't making work about how knowledge doesn't work or fails, but maybe limitations in general. So the failure and the unknown. So let's talk about the limits of perception for a second. So if you can think about the way that I'm communicating right now, and and the way that you are perceiving that. And it's working kind of through a series of translations. So originally we have my voice, which is creating a physical sound wave that is entering your ear, that is shaking these three little bones, and that rattle this little C that have these little hairs, and then the hairs shoot electrical messages to your brain that then translate into these words that I'm speaking now. And so that's essentially like a game of telephone that we all used to play in camp. And how can a message not be compromised after a series of translations like that? And the same with touch and sight. And then we have the limits of language. For example, love. Love's hard to define. It's an abstract concept, means many things to many people. So how can we fall into it if it's not a physical thing? Which then led me to metaphors. And we use metaphors for these blind spots, these cognitive blind spots, or we use metaphors for the limitations of language. So we might say, my love for you is as big as the sea. And of course, a metaphor is a comparison of two unlike things, using words like is, are, as, and were. This is one of my favorite pieces of all time, Felix Gonzalez Torres, The Perfect Lovers. And so for those of you unfamiliar with this, he took these clocks, started them at the same time with two separate fresh batteries. Given the mechanical differences, they kind of got out of sync a little bit, and then one battery would die before the other. And I thought this was such a beautiful piece because it was so simple and can mean many different things for many people. So it's a simple premise. And with that premise comes this sort of hovering group of possibilities of reads around it. And so it made me think of work that spirals out versus work that spirals in. And I think previously I had been making work that spirals in, that was sort of hermetically sealed, where I had figured everything out, and that had maybe I had a very specific intended meaning. And I liked the simple premise that could then go out. So that got me thinking about these spirals, and then how do we deal with the unknown? So I started to look to metaphors for the unknown. For example, the blue rose in Chinese mythology. This is used for as a symbol for hope in the face of unattainable love, the unknown, the uncanny. So I decided to try and make my own symbol for the unknown by buying a white rose and then dipping it in and having it hang out in this blue dye. But I guess this rose, it didn't work. I failed to come up with a symbol for the unknown. Maybe something in the rose's vascular system prevented it from fully sucking up that blue dye. So that's about as blue as it got. So I had to go to a grocery store and buy one that was basically spray painted. And so both of those images were displayed in an exhibition, this sort of smaller failure looking up to its larger successful cousin. And the title comes from alludes to a horizon and to searching. And I started thinking about the metaphor of the horizon, or the pathos of searching. No matter what energy you put into moving towards the horizon, it stays the same distance, it stays unattainable. And I really enjoyed the pathos in that thought. And so I made this piece called Motherly Advice. My mother was a shorthand champion, shout out Kyle Peets. Shorthand was this antiquated form of note-taking before computers, so secretaries could take notes very efficiently and quickly. And I guess they had competitions. She was #1 in her state, #3 in the country. Pretty good. So I had her write motherly advice to me, her son, in this language that I couldn't understand. And to prove I can't read this, you can see that this is upside down right now because that is an exclamation point. And so that's the first sentence. So that first sentence is a banger, and I have no idea what it reads. So that's what got me to thinking about gold, thinking pretty directly here of metaphors and the gold underneath, you know, the subterranean thing that you know is there, but you don't know where, but you're convinced it will help your life. To me, that was a similar sort of feel or mood to the idea of, you know, chasing a horizon. And it reminded me of what I was doing in grad school, which was I was studying this thing I love, but I wasn't exactly sure where it was. I was convinced that it was good for me, but at times questioned whether or not it was. And so Oscar Wilde, there are only two tragedies in this world: not getting the thing you want and getting the thing you want. And since this is a drawing lecture, here's my one drawing. How lovely it is not to live forever. This is a large drawing that's 42 inches tall and 84 inches wide or long. And I made it by first drawing this gold line here with a 24 karat gold leaf marker, and then following each subsequent line with a pen, so that each line kind of influences the next generation. So part of the same series of works, I made this called Hopeless Gold Digger, which is an ongoing project. And they are found paint swatches. So I collect all the paint swatches with the word gold in them. And then finally, this one here, the please refrain from breathing. So this is a 4x4 piece of wood, 4x4, and with a section of its own sawdust, kind of bisecting the entire piece. So back to this image here of me walking in the crater. One of my favorite paintings ever by Caspar David Friedrich, Monk by the Sea. Might be kind of hard to see, but you can see a small monk here. And I started thinking about the historic sublime and some of those ideas of terror and delight, being confronted by something that's bigger than you, a landscape, mountains, the ocean, time, eternity, death, and feeling both a paradoxical feeling of terror and delight, which led me to a series of works trying to connect the sublime to sports. So sublime is made of the Latin word limen, which means threshold or doorway. So again, we have this idea of boundaries, of things that live on those thresholds, that occupy both worlds, that maybe hold opposing truths, hybrid objects or hybrid ideas, transitional states, something turning or about to turn into something else. I wanted to challenge myself to work without text, because I had been using text a lot, coming from a poetry background. I thought maybe I was relying on it a little bit too heavily, so I tried to challenge myself not to use any text. I sourced a lot of images from YouTube fail videos, and those fail videos were sort of a dirty little secret of mine for a while. I enjoyed watching them, and I thought maybe that was cruel, or I shouldn't tell anybody. And I told a cousin about it, and he watched them too. So I started to think about them, and these images started to kind of remind me of the sublime a little bit. The reward of paragliding lies in the ineffable comes from the title of a Eugene Delacroix painting. The reward of painting lies in the ineffable. perhaps a body falling is the most elemental form of humor. Maybe we are laughing at the fact that gravity is pulling us to our graves. Perhaps we're laughing in the fate of our own deaths. Around the same time, I made this here called It Devours Itself, which was a sound piece performance where I bought 11 megaphones. And those megaphones were placed in a loop to create a negative feedback loop. And so you have output going into input, output, input, and then circling and circling, and eventually devouring itself. And so you can think of a negative feedback loop as a snake eating its own tail. And so every negative feedback loop eventually devours itself. Which led me to thinking about the end of the world and nuclear technology. So for this book here called About the End of the World, I took this image here of the Trinity test, which was America's first large-scale test or test of a large-scale nuclear missile. So I took that image, printed it out on just a laser printer, put it on the wall, took a photo of that, then printed that out, then took a photo of that, then printed that out, and so forth. And I did that until I went through an entire ream of paper. And so I'm going to play this video for you. There will be a couple seconds of silence and then kind of a jarring bolt of sound. This is coupled with a sound piece I made called Fight of the Fight Songs, where I took every fight song from every D1 college football team and played those all over top of each other at the same time. So kind of like what we did earlier. So I made that, that took me hours, and I made that while listening to a podcast about the Heaven's Gate cult. And it made me feel weird. And I started thinking, well, if I keep making work about these failure narratives and about limitations, then am I gonna just get sad? Or what would be the purpose of that research? Part 3, community, ritual, and dissent. So continuing with that transition in that thought of, you know, why am I concentrating on limitations, the unknown, on failure? What is the point? I made this piece here called Master Basketball Player, and it comes from a now debunked theory that if you spend 10,000 hours doing something, that you'll become a master. So when I was a kid, I didn't read books and I didn't make art, and I played a lot of sports, and I loved basketball, and I had major hoop dreams, and so I thought maybe, and then I became an artist, which is something even more unlikely than getting to the NBA. And so I thought maybe I could make my childhood dreams come true if I print 10,000 basketballs into a book. And as an artist, I can use this sort of twisted logic So that led me to sports. And like I was saying, as a kid, I was really into sports, and I play less sports now, but I still enjoy watching them. And it was kind of another dirty secret of mine as an artist. I thought maybe I shouldn't be into sports because they actually conflict with a lot of my politics. They celebrate hypermasculinity. They squash dissent, and there's hypermilitarism, commercialism, and so forth. But I thought maybe, you know, how can I get my work into the world in the same way that the natural light piece bridged both the outside world and the studio world. And I had just come from making these larger research-based projects, and I wanted to do something a little bit different. So I started thinking about this. Here's another UT shout out. I switched this one out just for you guys. Y'all remember that game? Poor kid. Okay, why does this happen? Why would a grown adult, with the exception of this boy, why would a grown adult cry when a spherical object doesn't go into a metal circle? So it might be helpful to think about these two ideas, innate versus arbitrary. So innate, something natural, something that's always been going on. Arbitrary, based on random choice, constructed. So you can think about language. All language is arbitrary. A cow is not a cow because it has cowness. So every word is arbitrary except for onomatopoeias like splash and boom, maybe moo. Okay, when rules or social conventions are imagined to be innate, they hold more power because they appear to be unmovable. So I brought this idea into a project I did with the Platte Forum artist residency in Denver, an amazing residency where I got to work with an incredible group of high school students from various Title I high schools in the area, underserved high schools. And so these are paid interns that work with, I think, 5 or 6 visiting artists a year on a 2-month project. And so the project I proposed and made with these students was called The Big Game. And The Big Game operated on a fictional premise in a dystopic future. So in 100 years from now, the whole world is damn near destroyed, and we don't really have much evidence of, of what happened. So myself, in this scenario, in this group of high school students, we belong to a group of activists that wanted to reintroduce culture into the world. And so we felt obliged to do this. And so we find a tattered book on the history of sports in a cave. However, the book is highly damaged, so we don't really know what this thing called sports is. And so we decide, well, let's make some teams and invent a new sport for the future, one without toxic masculinity and sexism and so forth. A big impetus for this project, and something I remind myself when I feel like everything's hopeless, or maybe art making isn't worth a damn, and I'm changing and I'm wasting my life, is I think about this often. So you could replace here literature with art. So you write or make art in order to change the world, knowing perfectly well that you probably can't, but also knowing that literature and/or art is indispensable to the world. The world changes according to the way people see it, and if you alter even but a millimeter the way people look at reality, then you can change it. So here are some of the tattered sports balls and gloves that we found in this cave, implements of sports we didn't really know what to do with. And you can see that they're covered in red from the great nuclear blast. We think that's a forest. These are the students physically constructing the game. This project was also coupled with these single sheet books and that highlighted activist athletes that were sort of our mentors for the week. Athletes using their platform to raise awareness about social justice. And so we started with CAP, of course, and then we moved back a little bit in history to Megan Rapinoe and Mahmoud Abdul Rauf and John Carlos. And so these were available for free online, and they're double-sided with the instructions on how to make it. I enjoyed that democratic aspect of that dissemination and free downloads. At the same time, I was making this project about the end of the world, this red world, this hot red world. Phoenix was melting. I just read, or I just heard on NPR that Phoenix had something like over 110 days this year, 110-degree days. Okay, so the big game, the performance came with all the accoutrements of a good spectacle, like an MC and cheering diehard fans, and a court and snacks. The students designed their logos and the team names, and you can see a halftime performance and the tickets to the game and so forth. The game ended up being like this weirdo version of dodgeball, which we called duckball because we didn't know what dodgeball was. This is a project I made with the Art Shanty Arts Festival. So I believe it's a biannual now, or it might be annually now. But they invite artists to submit proposals to make an ice fishing shanty that houses some sort of art, interactive art experience. So we made this fully functional solar-powered arcade that featured one game and one game only, air hockey. And so we constructed these. You can see these glow-in-the-dark custom-made posters. We laser cut and fabricated these medals here for champions like this kid. So at the same time, I kept thinking about how can I introduce my work back into the world? How could I use vernacular forms that people are used to, like the language of sports. I really enjoyed the way that sports was a common language understood by many that could then be reprogrammed to get weird or to be subversive or to say something new. I really enjoyed the way that these marquee signs work outside of churches. I loved how analog it was. It's basically like an analog Twitter. Operates on a one-to-one level. You see them locally. So I thought, what if I make my own sign and try to expand the vocabulary what those signs often do, which is to sell. So this is at Interlochen where Megan and I used to work. And here are some of the signs that I made. This one was inspired by this sign right down the road that said, "Think spring." This is like late April or something in Michigan. Ooh. So at the same time, you can see, so I lived in this little cabin right here. And you can kind of see that here. Behind this photograph is the art building. So I could walk to that art building very quickly, but I had to make a choice. Do I go down this way or do I go down this way? I couldn't walk as the crow flies. So one day I decided I'm just gonna dig a shortcut. And then I started doing some calculations. I started to become nervous that the shortcut took a long time to shovel, and I got nervous that maybe it was taking more time than it was saving. So I did some calculations. So my commute without the shortcut was 1 minute, 7 seconds. Commute time with the shortcut, 51 seconds. So I saved 16 seconds per commute. 10 average commutes a day, 240 minutes. Total time saved per day, 2 minutes, 40 seconds. Time left at the job, 16 weeks. Total time saved commuting at this job, 4 hours, 58 minutes, 40 seconds. Minus the time it took to shovel a shortcut, minus the time it took to do this math, 3 hours, 8 minutes add to my life. Boom. I had convinced myself that art could do something. very shortly after, I was at the DMV and I noticed front license plates for sale. This was in North Carolina, where they don't require a front license plate, so you could buy a decorative one. And again, the vocabulary was limited. It was something like limited to religion, sports, and patriotism. So I thought maybe I could take that great format of 6 inches by 12 and claim that as an alternative exhibition space, and turn it into a curatorial project where I put other people's work on the license plate every month, and then it literally gets art moving through the world. So you can see a Megan Hildebrandt right there, Peter Abrami. So every month I do this. If you're interested, you can send me images, sketches, and ideas at the following email, kpeets@bellsouth.net. It just needs to be ready to mount. You can take images or drawings and print them out. There's a company that will print them out on a piece of aluminum. Okay, so wrapping up here. So I just want to talk for a quick second about the power of gesture. Another one of my favorite all-time pieces, Francis Elise. This is he got a group of participants to start at the base of this dune, each holding a shovel. They start at the base, they take a shovel of sand, shovel it forward, take a step forward, and they do that ascending and descending the mountain, essentially moving the mountain over a foot. Now, did it really move the mountain over a foot? Probably not, but I can suspend my disbelief, and I can use that gesture kind of like a thought experiment, and I can play along, and then I can be open to what might come out of that. And so that got me thinking about ritual and gesture, which led to this project. Sorry. This is in the way.
The spring is coming.
So the way that project started was I got off the phone with somebody I love, and we had gone into a fight, and I was upset. So I hung up the phone, and there just happened to be an old potato sitting on the counter, and I instinctively took it, opened the door, and threw it out into the night void, which were just probably my neighbor's backyard. But it made me feel better, and so I wanted to share this amazing technology with my friends. So I made this very simple call here to participate in the sort of silly but cathartic experience. And so I realized that I really didn't need much to create a community, to create a ritual, to protect attention, to slow down. So I made this piece here called Together at Last at Twilight Time. And it's a very simple group performance. You get together with a group of people when the sun is setting, and you watch it in silence. And then it's done when all the color in the sky has disappeared. And so these are invitations at an exhibition I made at the University of Notre Dame. And so you sit together with a group of people in silence, which you often never do. And then things are very slow and difficult at first, but then something opens up when you give in to the experience. Okay, I believe this is my second to last piece here. So I bought this cup here from my friend Troy Aiken, this beautiful cup, and I broke it in like the first couple of days of owning it, and I was really sad. But then I thought maybe I could still use it, and I tried to drink out of it, and that little V-shaped chip fit perfectly on my nose, and I came up with an idea. I should make a cup for people with big noses, but then realized I didn't know how to throw. I'd never done that, so I learned how to do that, and I made this cup. And then it led to other ideas. For example, a cup for people who are bad at letting go. A cup for people who like drinking coffee off the table. A cup for people who drink too much. A cup for people who enjoy teamwork. A cup for the empty-handed. A cup for people who dislike chewy meat. A cup for people who live on the side of mountains. A cup for people with slippery fingers. And another teamwork cup. And so in a way, this acts kind of like gesture. This is intended to solve a problem, but really will ultimately fail. So we can then see that problem or the solution in a new way. So my final piece and the final gesture of this section is this project here called A Monument to Wholeness, and it's a screen print project. So that's an image of Mount St. Helens in Washington before it blew. And it was a beautiful symmetrical mountain. And then when it blew, half of it just slid away like mud. And so I'm printing this is ongoing. I'm printing it over and over and over until it falls over. And then I'm gonna back it off a little bit by just taking a couple pieces of paper off, finding that exact tipping point, and I'm just gonna back it off a little bit so it remains whole. Currently, I've been working on this for over a year, and at this point, it's kind of a nightmare. But I believe that's it. Thank you. Or should I say, thank you?